So here I am in my van in Scotland, travelling around, spending the nights in my van, and I thought, well, I can make a video here, I can keep travelling, because I can keep doing this stuff, because I love doing this stuff. And I want to talk about death. I've been thinking about it a bit. I did a piece called Hell's Grannies, which was about ageing. I did that a few weeks ago. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I'm sure death got mentioned more than once. So this is going to be more specifically about death. And what does astrology have to say about it? That's really what I'm interested in. What does astrology have to say about death? Because the Christian church has stuff to say about death. Science has stuff to say about death. What does astrology say? It's a big subject, about which we can never really know. It doesn't stop us talking about it. Now, the thing about astrology is that there are various transits that can be associated with death. Various planets in the sky impacting on your chart that can be associated with death. And so each of those planets, by their nature, says something. By the nature of their action, says something about the nature of death. Jupiter, it's all the outerish ones. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. They can each say something. They can each predict death in a way. Now, one of the best ways to predict death is by looking at the charts of the people close to you or close to the person. They can often reveal it more clearly because the person dying, well, they might be quite happy to die. Yeah, it might not be a huge transit, but it might have a much bigger effect. It might shake the people close to them as it brings into question who they are. Now that big element, that big person in their life is gone. Father, mother, child, spouse, whatever it is. And there's also something else, is that you're not supposed to predict death according to some schools of astrology. It's just a big no-no. You even have to sign a bit of paper before they'll give you your bloody certificate saying that you will never predict death. Well, sometimes you do. You just have to use your sense about it. You don't predict death to someone or that they're going to die out of the blue. But if they ask you, you give them a straight answer. If they're young and healthy, well, you have to say, I don't know, because all sorts of things can predict it. Yeah? I might well just be wrong. But if they're ill, well, then you look and you give an honest answer. We have issues. Sex, death and money. The 8th house. Yeah? We don't want to talk about any of them. So I'm a bit suspicious of that so-called astrological ethic when it's viewed in the context of our difficulty of talking about death. Because death is a straightforward thing. It's just what happens. I read a book a couple of years ago called Western Attitudes to Death by a French scholar called Philippe Ariès. It's just a short book based on 4 lectures, and he's a bit academic, but it makes the point. He traces our attitudes to death going back to the Middle Ages. So he goes, well, in the Middle Ages, it would sometimes be the person themselves who's going to die. They realise they're going to die, so they tell all their family, yeah, gather around me, do whatever rituals you need to do, because I'm off. And it was treated as a straightforward thing. Nowadays, if anything, it's the other way round. Everyone else gets told, but we don't mention it to the person who's actually going to die. It's almost the opposite. Whereas it was dead ordinary for them. It's just part of what happened. I had a dream about that a few years ago. I was on the side of death, and there were just these thousands of death happening all the time. Humans, animals, plants, whatever. It was almost banal. It was just so ordinary. It was like an airport lounge and all these departure lounge. Everyone departing. It was just normal. It's just what happened. But from our side, it's this great unknown. It's understandable. We have difficulties with it. Anyway, move on a bit from the Middle Ages, and suddenly it becomes this reckoning. When you die, it's this reckoning with God. Yeah. And, you know, Dr. Johnson was terrified of dying, that he'd be sent to hell because he hadn't fully used his talents, because he knew how talented he was. Move forward to nowadays, it's an extinction, and anything less any other view is just an avoidance of our own existential aloneness. Yeah, and you know, any meaning is our contribution. The universe is meaningless, and we are alone in it. So that's pretty bloody bleak. Anyway, so there are these different ways. So a Jupiter transit, that can signify death, that can time death. Because when you die, you get brought back to the land of the gods by Jupiter, the king of the gods. So that's very positive. That's a good attitude to have. When someone I was close to died, Jupiter was just above the horizon at the moment they died, and it was almost like he was being welcomed back. Yeah? So Jupiter, yeah, you can look at it like that. Saturn, just to take a side angle, astrology tells us that we're fated. Yeah? Our chart is our fate. It tells us who we are. We have no choice about that. We're in a human body. That's our fate. We have certain interests and not others. That is our fate. So much of our life is fated. But it's a living fate. It's one that we live, in which we also have free will. It's you can't get your head around it logically. As Jung said, free will is the willingness to do gladly that which you have to do. Yeah? So our death, in a way, is writ. Yeah, it's also a living thing. And I'm saying that, bringing in that element of fate, because we come to Saturn, old father time. It's the harvest. Yeah, you've had your time. It's time to go. It's your fate. It's your fullness. It's your ripeness. The tree falls eventually. It's all that sort of quality. It's in the fullness of time. That's what Saturn tells us. So Jupiter is this welcome. Saturn is this fullness of time. You may go under a Uranus transit, which could be quite sudden. And what is Uranus about? Well, Uranus is essentially creative. He brings in something new that you hadn't ever thought about before. Yeah? And that's what death is. It's a complete change of paradigm. Yeah? So it's an adventure. It may well be sudden. Yeah? You might have to get used to it once you're dead. And who knows what it's like being dead. But Uranus brings that quality. Suddenly it's this big landscape, this different landscape that you hadn't thought of. Neptune. Well, Neptune's the soul, isn't he? Neptune's soulful, and he's connected to everything. So when you die, you're being returned to your connection with everything. Yeah, that you'd forgotten. You had this illusion of an ego, this illusion of a separate self. And that's gone. And you return to the womb of everything. And that love, the whole universe loves you and always has done. Just looking at the time on this, see how much time I've got. I'm okay. Yeah. And then the sunshine's getting in the way. I don't want to exceed the TikTok bloody 10-minute limit. Ha. Well, good discipline. Pluto's the final one. Yeah. Well, what is Pluto is about? He's about renewal. That's what a Pluto transit is about. So if Pluto takes you, it's a renewal. Life is always renewing. It dies and it renews. We see that in nature. And death is the same. It's a renewal. What an interesting way of looking at it. So, yeah, we're reborn in another way. Yeah, it's life moving on. You can't stop life moving on. We learn this during life. What we learn during life is to trust these changes. Yeah, life in that way is a preparation for death, because death is the biggest change of all. And all these different transits in all their different ways, they may be difficult in some ways, particularly the outermost planets, but we learn to trust them. We learn to trust what's coming next. Life teaches us that. Because I have loved life, I know I shall love death. That is what Rabindranath Tagore, the Bengali poet, said. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. We can trust death, life, through its process of ongoing change that we learn to trust, that is out of our control, but we surrender to, and we go with death is exactly the same as that. Good.